Today's in-service training is entitled Evaluation Techniques Focus Groups. We're really looking forward to presenting this to you all today. I know myself and Dr. Warner are big fans of using focus groups in our own efforts, so hopefully we can provide you all with a good outline and best practices so that you all can use it in your own program areas. So first off, before we get into the lecture part of this, I'd ask a couple questions of you all so that we can get an understanding of your experience with focus groups. So first off, how many of you all have participated in focus groups? So if you could put a simple yes, no, just get an idea of this group, how many have participated in that type of study. All right. So it looks like there's a little bit of a mix, mostly yes, but we have some no's. Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag here. So there's some folks that probably are a little bit more familiar with it, and then there's some folks that familiar with the concept but haven't engaged in focus groups before. So that's good. So on another note, how many have led or co-led a focus group? So maybe not participated in one, but used one within your program or led for somebody else. Okay. So it looks like a mixed bag in, and I'm assuming that those that probably haven't participated in focus groups have also not led one. So that gives us a really good idea of kind of the levels of familiarity with focus groups that'll help guide some of the examples and stuff that we give in today's lecture. So we'll go ahead and get started. So within this presentation, we'll go over some of the utilities and examples that focus groups are important for, outline some of the focus group best practices that are important to consider for your own effort, discuss the different focus group responsibilities, everything from planning, developing questions, recruiting, moderating, and analyzing reporting, and then discuss some of the challenges and solution strategies associated with really developing robust and meaningful focus groups. And that can help inform what you all are doing in your different areas. So to start off, focus groups are really a wonderful tool or method for gathering information for both formative and summative evaluations. But you want to make sure you don't limit your use of focus group to the time after a program is implemented or completed. Focus groups are also valuable for getting information in the design phases of programs, policies, and even evaluations. So I'll go over different areas in which focus groups are useful, and then just provide some extension examples so you can understand how focus groups are leveraged within each of these areas. So the first way in which focus groups can be used is to assess needs. And one of the examples is Extension wanted to expand its outreach programs to minority ethnic and cultural groups in the state of Florida. It conducted focus groups to listen to these residents to determine what types of outreach programs would be most beneficial to their communities. Extension held focus groups in various locations and in different languages to gather insights of local residents. With the information that they gathered from focus groups, Extension then designed effective ways to delivering services, classes, and other opportunities. So as you can see, this was focused on understanding the need within their audience so that they can design the program. The next is to actually design the intervention. And the Extension example is Extension teamed with a local school district to design a program to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables that grade school students ate while at school. The team conducted focus groups with students, parents, teachers, and the food service staff to identify barriers to eating fruits and vegetables and to identify motivators for eating more fruits and vegetables. So after this process, the team used the focus group findings to design a program that increased kids' motivations to eat fruits and vegetables and decrease the barriers. So a lot of the takeaways and themes were really integral in how they specifically designed and structured the program to ensure that it was able to meet the outcomes that they look to create. So the next one is to evaluate policy options. When Extension contemplated changes in its policy regarding providing individual consultations, it conducted focus groups with clientele to get feedback on the changes. They wanted to understand a few different things. How easy were the policy changes to understand? Do they make sense to the clientele? How easy will be the new policies to be enforced? And by answering these questions, it helped policymakers craft policies that were easy to understand and gave them a better frame for how individual consultations and the policy for leveraging that approach would fit into their own programs and enforce different stipulations in how those consultations would move forward. The next area in which focus groups can be used is to pilot test data collection instruments. And this is something that's really important with the extension as we're developing surveys to understand program outcomes. The example that we've got here is a year after the completion of a water conservation study. The program leads were asked to conduct focus groups with participants to evaluate the program. Although the participants were extremely positive about the water conservation program, they complained consistently and with much passion about the telephone surveys to collect the participant data, even though we never asked about the telephone interviews. Participants said the telephone surveys were tedious and frustrating because the response categories changed frequently and without visual cues, and the participants couldn't remember which response category to use. Some said they became so frustrated they didn't take the survey seriously. So had the focus groups been used to test the data collection instrument and process, we might have been able to identify the problem and got a better compliance and data from that process. So by pilot testing, we can get the impressions from those that would complete the survey. So, they understand what's in the survey and they'll feel frustrated by the process. So it really helps increase the amount of data that you collect and the quality of that data. The next use for focus groups is to understand quantitative findings. And the example is the extension system monitor its performance using a quantitative data collection system. As the extension service grew, ratings from staff declined. Administrators did not know how to interpret their lower scores or how to reverse them. All they knew was the scores were down and they wanted them back up. So this is obviously something that has to do with the satisfaction of their staff and faculty. An outside organization conducted focus groups with staff, asking them to help the administration understand the drop in ratings and how the scores might be improved. So for faculty or staff that has folks that they work with, this is just a way to ensure that everyone's expectations are being met and there's no issues internally on working together or working with folks that are underneath you. So just to make sure that everyone's on the same page and happy with how things are moving forward. Just got a couple more applications for focus groups. The next being to monitor and evaluate agency operations. Extension regularly uses focus groups to monitor the employee climate, to canvass employees about human resource systems, to evaluate the promotion and recognition systems, and to improve cooperative efforts within the agency and within other cooperators. So as you can see, there's kind of a close tie to the previous use. Focus groups have helped Extension identify key factors that improve morale, streamline the promotion process, and improve collaboration at all levels. Of course, as mentioned, focus groups can also be used in formative and summative evaluations. They've been used to gather information for participants and staff to find out what's working, what's not working, how can programs be improved, and different things of that nature. So they've been able to use to listen to participants and staff to get perceptions of program outcomes through the focus group process. So it's been really, really important, as you see, both of those are for internal improvements to make sure that everyone that's working together is on the same page. Finally, focus groups may be conducted with a variety of stakeholder groups. This includes policymakers, administrators, staff, and really other key stakeholder groups who want the evaluation findings for decision making. Frontline folks that work with Extension will also be asked to collect and provide evaluation data, and experts in evaluation will obviously be part of that process. Focus groups with decision makers might help identify gaps between the data that's currently available for decision making and the data that's needed. Focus groups with those who must provide the data might focus on how to get useful, credible data without overburdening frontline workers. Focus groups with evaluation experts might concentrate on how to create a cost-effective system that can provide the data decision makers need. So as you can see, based on what groups are involved, there's different nuances that you need to consider. So going over just a general outline of some of the best practices to consider, and we'll hone on in some of these as we moved on, but it's a good idea to kind of get a high-level overview of all of these best practices so that you understand kind of the whole landscape of focus groups. So the first and one of the most important best practices is to ensure that the questions are focused. The questions used in a focus group interview should be carefully sequenced so that they focus more and more specifically on the key topic of the study. That is, the questions progressively direct participants into discussing the topic in greater detail and more depth. In other interview environments, the researcher might ask the important questions first or use an informal, unstructured approach to interviewing. These strategies are not used in focus group interviews. The next best practices is there's no push for agreement or consensus, so this kind of gets to leading. Focus groups are distinctive, and the goal is not to reach consensus or to discover a single solution. Other group processes, such as the nominal group process or the Delphi method, are intended to move the group towards agreement. I won't get into that, but those are both very useful tools in getting a group to move towards consensus, which is obviously not the focus of focus group within evaluation. Focus of focus group, that's pretty funny. Although agreement can be a worthy goal, it is not the intent of the focus group. Focus groups are conducted to gather the range of opinions and experiences. The moderator doesn't pressure participants to agreement. So through this process, we're able to gain valuable insights in the focus groups, even from individuals who have described unique perceptions or experiences. The one way to think about distinctions between different types of groups is to identify where their decisions are made. In focus group studies, the decision-making process occurs after all focus groups have been completed. Focus group participants often offer recommendations, but these are used as input into the decision-making process by those who sponsor the study. And by contrast, the nominal group processes, the group is encouraged to make a decision at the conclusion of the study. So as you can see, the differences within the Delphi study and the nominal approach, you're trying to get to a single solution, but within focus groups, you're trying to build a broad array of perceptions to help to better inform and develop a comprehensive lens towards decision-making. Another best practice to ensure that the environment is permissive and non-threatening. It's really important that within focus groups, the environment is comfortable. If you're going to have your participants open up to you and provide real and honest feedback, it's important that they feel comfortable in doing so. The moderator must be perceived as a person who's open to really hearing anything. So you want to make sure that you don't cut anyone off or make them feel like what they're contributing to the process is not meaningful. The moderator lays out the ground rules and states that participants may have differing opinions and there are no wrong answers. They want to make sure, again, all views are welcome. And if at time the group seems to be rushing towards agreement, the moderator might ask if there are opposing views, so just to really get a good discussion going. The focus group offers honoring environment where individuals feel their views will be respected. The participants are sure that their names will not be used in any report. So as we all know with IRB, anonymity is important, but it's also important in having folks open up during this process. The goal is to make people, again, feel as comfortable as possible so they're willing to say what they think and describe what they feel. And the place in which you hold focus groups is also important. So you want to make sure that they are convenient for and familiar to the participants. And when you get started, make sure that as a moderator, you welcome participants and start that process of making them feel comfortable and appreciated through the welcome process. The next best practice is that participants are homogeneous. And there's sometimes a misperception on this where folks feel like they need to get a really diverse group together to get diverse opinions, but that in fact is not the case, and it has somewhat to do with the environment. People are invited to a particular focus group because they have something in common. They might all live in the same neighborhood, belong to the same organization, or have experienced a new program. Or they might have demographic factors in common that are important to the study, such as age, gender, race, or ethnicity. Focus groups are supposed to use a homogeneous propulsive sample composed of information-rich participants. This homogeneity fosters a sense of commonality that results in greater sharing of insights. Sometimes there's confusion about homogeneous sampling because the participants are rarely completely homogeneous. What homogeneity means in this context is that the participants have something in common that relates to the topic of conversation. So for example, in a study involving parents in a local school, the basis of homogeneity is that they are parents and they have children attending a particular school. Those same parents might have different races or ethnic backgrounds, different occupations, different ages, or maybe different in some other ways or by other factors. The emphasis on homogeneity gives individuals comfort that they have something in common with other participants, and again, this fosters thoughtful listening and sharing. The next best practice is that the group size is reasonable. The size of a focus group can range from as few as 4 or 5 to as many as a dozen people. The most workable size depends on the background of the participants, the complexity of the topic, and the expertise of the moderator. The larger group of 9 to 12 tend to work better when working with consumer topics that do not evoke strong attachments. Smaller groups of 5 to about 8 are recommended for topics that may be seen as sensitive or personal, or when the participants have considerable expertise or experience with the topic. One of the dangers to consider with the larger group is that it results in trivial responses, somewhat shortened responses, and less elaboration on critical detail, simply because of time constraints. So you've got so many folks that are trying to share, they feel like they need to give respect to each other, and their answers tend to be more terse. In a focus group of a given length, each of the 6 people can talk twice as long as each of the 12 people can. The richness of the focus group is in details and explanations of the comments. This elaboration comes from having adequate time for participants to talk. So you can see how size is really important. Patterns and trends are examined across groups. So that is the next best practice. Seldom would we conduct just one focus group. The rule of thumb is to hold 3 or 4 focus groups within each type of participant for which you want to analyze results. Therefore, if you want to compare and contrast the ways that, let's for example, men and women view a particular topic, you would want to conduct 3 to 4 groups with men and 3 to 4 groups with women. And we'll get into a little bit more of why that is in a later slide. The next best practice is the group is guided by a skillful moderator. And I think this is kind of one of those obvious comments, but it's still something that is important to consider. Some of the skills that a moderator would need to have that really shows that they're skillful is they're friendly, open, and engaged with participants before the group starts, making people feel welcome and comfortable. They give a thorough introduction, helping people feel that they have enough information to trust the process. The moderator then is able to move slowly from one question to another and smoothly. They have a set of questions and they get through all the questions in the allotted time. These skillful moderators also help to get people to share their ideas and views freely, and they know just when to probe for additional insights. Typically, you want a moderator to ask the question, then sit back and listen. This way you can let the participants interact. You give them the opportunity to have a conversation about the question. You know a focus group is working well when participants can begin to build on each other's comments rather than continually responding directly to the moderator. The moderator begins to play a less central role as participants share their experiences, debate ideas, or offer opinions on the topic. Some groups arrive at this point quickly and others never get to this point. So you can see how the moderator plays a really key role in that process. And finally, you have to make sure that the analysis fits the study of the focus group. One of the most time-consuming aspects of focus groups research is the analysis component. This is the process of identifying trends or patterns across groups and deriving meaning from the focus group data. In some situations, it can involve audio recording, transcripts, and content analysis of the exact words of participants. In other situations, the analysis might be based on observation, field notes, and some other memories of the research team. The rigor and intensity of the analysis has to fit the circumstances in the study. The critical factor in all analysis is the process be systematic and verifiable. It should be systematic in that it follows a prescribed plan in a consistent way that fits the solution. And it should be verifiable in that it leaves a trail of evidence that others can review. So what this means is you don't want to have a piecemeal approach in which you do this. You really want to develop a system so you're methodical in the way that you move forward, and then develop kind of like an audit trail between the data itself and your theme, so that folks, as they review your takeaways, they understand that it's directly driven from the data and not something that's your own opinion or something based on your own bias. So moving forward, there are key responsibilities that you as an individual that would be putting on a focus group needs to consider. And these fall within the buckets of planning, developing questions, recruiting, moderating each groups and capturing the data, and analyzing reporting. A key role in the study team leader, sometimes called a principal investigator, who takes on the overall leadership of the study, needs to make sure that the best practices are followed within each of these areas. The lead coordinates the budget, the timeline, the evaluation team, the overall project. In most evaluations, this lead assumes one or more responsibilities that were just listed. So we'll go into some of the best practices for that approach. Just bear with me, guys. All right. So I'll move into each of the responsibility areas. So the first has to do with planning. The main challenge during the planning stage is to come up with a study design that will answer the questions you have within the constraints of your timeline and budget. You and your team must be clear about the purpose of the study. You must decide whether focus group interviewing is an appropriate method for your study. And if focus groups are appropriate, you must decide how many focus groups you will do and to whom to listen to. So the first steps is to understand how people see needs and their assets in lives and communities. You have to understand how people think or feel about something, such as an idea, behavior, a product, or service. Focus groups can be used to get reactions to plans before big amounts of time or money are spent, and can help evaluate programs or products are working and how they may be improved. So these are some of the ways in which you know that focus groups are important, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to pilot testing. Focus group interviews are not to be used as a process for getting people to come to consensus, a way to teach knowledge or skills, and a test of knowledge or skills. So that first step is really trying to figure out if it's appropriate, and if you fit it within the top bucket where you're trying to see people's needs, trying to understand behaviors, pilot tests, so on and so forth, that's the way that you understand that focus groups are appropriate for you, and those other latter items really don't identify a fit with using focus groups for those types of efforts. Also, if you answer yes to any of these next questions that I'll give, you'll likely need to consider other methods to use in conjunction with or instead of focus groups. So, goodness gracious, this thing has a mind of its own. Do you need statistical data? Focus groups cannot provide statistical data to a population. The number of people they listen to is so small. So statistical data analysis is really not in the wheelhouse of focus groups. It's more qualitative in nature. The next to consider is, will harm come to the people sharing their ideas? Although you may promise that you will keep information shared in the group confidential, you cannot guarantee that participants in the group will keep information confidential. If harm may come to people who openly share in the group, choose another message, such as individual interviews. So you obviously don't want it to be around a topic you feel like the folks involved will be in danger. I don't think anyone on this webinar is in that scenario, but just something to consider. And then the final question is, are people polarized by your topic? If people are very passionate and polarized by some topics, like abortion, race, gay marriage, and the environment, emotions will tend to run high, so it's difficult to conduct a focus group that contains people holding strong opposing views. So taking this all into consideration, and if there's a better, more efficient way to gather information, then maybe focus groups is not the way then to move forward. Once you've decided, okay, this is right, focus groups really make sense for what I want to do, then hone in and clarify the purpose of the study. Sometimes evaluation team members disagree about the type of information they want to obtain through the study and what they will do with the information once they have it. It is really important that you have a clear purpose that makes planning, conducting the groups, analyzing, and reporting simpler. So it's an obvious statement, but make sure you understand and clarify the purpose, especially if you're working with a team on the focus group. The next is decide what people types of people to listen to, essentially your target audience. What types of people have the experience or characteristics that will enable them to provide input on the study topic? That's really the question that should drive your decision on who to engage. Michael Quinn Patton calls these individuals information-rich cases. Really means that you're going to get the best information out of them. They might not be the most highly educated or the most influential, but they are the people who know something about what you want to know. For example, young people who drop out of school know a lot about what it takes to keep young people in school. Teachers, counselors, and parents can give you different perspectives. So that just kind of gives you an example of, based on your purpose and what you're looking to explore, how that then will dictate the target audience. You should consider listening to those most affected by the change or program, those who must support the change or program before it can happen, employees, government leaders or elected officials, and influentials. And influentials means respective people who may or may not hold an official office. So this is just a key stakeholder group that's important to listen to throughout the process and will help to move your program forward. The next step is to listen to your target audience. Find a few like people you want to invite to the focus groups. So for example, in the study just described, you might look at for a few people who have dropped out of school. Tell them about the study, ask for their advice, and find out the things such as who can ask these kind of questions. So essentially, who would be the best moderator? What type of moderator would people feel comfortable with? Where might the groups be held? What days or times might work well for people? And how do you find people with the characteristics you are looking for? And what will take to get the people to come to the focus group? So by engaging the target audience in that process, you're able to develop the focus group in a way that's more in tune with the needs of that audience. The next step is put your thoughts into writing. Develop a written plan, and this really speaks to develop a written plan. Developing this plan forces you to arrange your ideas in a logical order and also allows you to review your plan and other comments. Your written plan ought to include a statement of purpose, describe the number of groups, list the potential questions, and provide a timeline for a budget. So as you can see within the planning phase, there's a lot that needs to go on, but this is really important to make sure that you're systematic in how you move forward. The basic strategy is to conduct 3 or 4 focus groups with each audience category that's of interest to you. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but now you can give some detail on why that is. So if you want to evaluate a special education program and want to compare student, parent, and teacher reactions to the program, you might plan 3 or 4 focus groups with students, 3 or 4 focus groups with parents, and 3 or 4 focus groups with teachers. If you are hearing new information out the 3rd and 4th group with an audience category, you might continue conducting focus groups until you've achieved redundancy. And what redundancy means is you're not getting new information, and that's really important for qualitative methodology. That lets you know that you've reached the point where you've included enough individuals in the process. So that's really when you know, okay, I've done enough focus groups, now I can move forward. Do not use statistical formula for determining sample size. Instead, use the concept called redundancy, and it's also used as the term of theoretical saturation. With redundancy or theoretical saturation, as I mentioned, the researcher continues interviewing until no new insights are presented. So that's really the key. You're not learning anything new. In effect, the research has exhausted the range of views on the topic. Continuing the interviews after reaching theoretical saturation will only yield more of what the researcher already knows. This tends to occur after 3 or 4 focus groups with an audience type. So there's really no sense to continue to conduct focus groups after that point in time. You're really just wasting your time and that of the participants. So I know folks don't want to incur any more work than they need to, so this is really a good rule of thumb to make sure that you understand that. So the next slide gets into developing questions. And there are really a lot of things that you need to consider when developing questions, but these are just kind of the high level notes that you need to make sure that you consider when doing so. So develop questions that address the purpose of the study. Although that really sounds obvious, some study teams get swept away dreaming up questions that would either be fun to ask or nice to know, but that really don't address the study of the or purpose of the study. The next is to identify questions that produce informations that useful for decision makers, and we discussed that a little bit earlier. And decision makers can be everyone from policymakers to administrators to yourself as a program lead, but really making sure that you have the right information to make decisions. Write your questions so that they are conversational and easy for participants to understand. Use words that participants would use. It's really important. If you're asking questions that they don't understand, or is using words that they wouldn't typically use, they're less likely to open up and discuss the topic. So understand the target audience and develop the questions in a way that the target audience would use and understand. Aim for the right number of questions. This really means not too many or not too few. And what does that exactly mean? Usually a set of 10 to 14 questions is appropriate for a 2 to 4 hour focus group. Obviously, if your focus group is less than 2 to 4 hours, you want to trim down those questions, but use that as kind of a frame of reference when putting together your list of questions for your own focus group. And then finally, include some questions that get participants actively involved by listing, sorting, arranging, drawing, or some other activity. And this really just means to get them out of their comfort zone, get them something that's really an easy activity on the front end, and get them engaged and involved in the process. I know a lot of folks on this training have probably done their own in-service trainings and have seen the value of getting folks engaged and getting them to open up. So this is just one way in which to do that. And it's really important that you do that on the front end so that they're able to share throughout the process. So the next slide gets at developing the questioning route. So what is the questioning route? A questioning route is a set of questions developed for one or more focus groups. For a 2 to 4 hour focus group, a plan to use 10 to 14 questions written in a conversational style. And so I'll give you 5 steps to follow when developing these question routes. Oh, and I just spilt my water, so please bear with me. All right, so the first is hold a brainstorming session. You're in a brainstorming session, you typically want to invite around 4 to 6 people who are familiar with the study, and it typically would be about a 1 to 2 hour meeting. These people might be colleagues, members of a research team, or individuals represent the client who's requesting the evaluation. Ask the people to generate questions that could be asked in the study, and then try to use the procedures of brainstorming. Questions might be briefly discussed, but don't get stuck debating the merits of a single question. Have one person record all of these questions. So this is really a stakeholder-driven model to develop questions through that brainstorming session. The next is to use the brainstorming questions to draft a questioning route. Groups are good at brainstorming, but aren't efficient at developing questioning routes. So you want to have one person use the questions generated in the meeting as the basis developing the questioning route. Select the questions that best address the study purpose, very important, and seem most likely to provide useful information. So this kind of serves as a frame for understanding which questions to include and which to get rid of. Rephrase these questions using the ideas throughout this presentation, taking into consideration ease of language, jargon, things of that nature. Then sequence the questions in a logical flow from more general questions, diving down and honing in onto more specific questions. And then once you've done that, say the questions out loud. Are they easy to ask? Do they seem like questions a target audience will be able to understand? There really is no magic bullet to having to looking at this, but within the 10 to 14 questions, you want to make sure that they're really easy to understand and then move in within that logical sequence. Once you have drafted the questioning route, you can estimate how much time you think the group should spend on each question. Not all questions deserve the same amount of consideration. So some questions are simpler or less important than others and can be easily covered in, let's say, about 5 minutes. Some of the more key questions may be complex or include activities. A key question may take up to 15 to 20 minutes. So once you've estimated the times for each of the questions, you can add up the total to determine whether you should add or delete questions. So this will not only give you an understanding of how long the focus group is, but making sure that you keep it into the time constraints that you're looking to develop. The next step is to send the draft questioning route out for feedback. And this is no different than if you're working on an article with a group of folks. Send the draft to the brainstorming team and ask, will these questions get us the information we need, first and foremost? Then we have to look at what we missed, what can be deleted. Are these the words the participants would use? Does the flow make sense? And then revise the questioning route based on the team's feedback. Remember, the same questions are asked in all interviews with each type of participant. However, if separate groups are going to be conducted, for example, with teachers, parents, and students, a slightly different questioning route may be used for each of these audience. For example, you might ask a student a question that you don't ask to parents or teachers. Keep a core set of questions the same in the questioning route so responses can be compared across audiences. So here are some examples of questioning routes based on the different uses of focus groups. The first being pilot testing new materials. So as you can see, the first set of questions are very, very broad. What did you like the best? What is one of the things that you like the least? And then you go all the way into what advice do you have for us as we introduce the SNOW program? So we have everything from that more broad to asking and soliciting for specific recommendations. And then you get some more information on potential barriers to the program, what would help to increase your participation or desire to participate, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, this is a way to pilot new programs, engage the audience, and understand from them what your program would need to look like to ensure that folks like themselves and others would become involved. So the next is for formative evaluation. And again, you see the same sequence of questions, more broad into more specific. And for formative evaluation, you're looking at more of the quality of the workshop rather than the outcomes that were created. So again, you're asking them what they liked, what they didn't like, what could be improved, and what advice they would give for the program. So as you can see, it's getting a lot of the important details that would get at quality of process of implementation, and going from more of the broad questions to really honing in on what they want to know, which is essentially getting advice from the target audience on how to improve or make the program more meaningful. All right, so the next is for evaluating services with children. And the reason why I included this is because it shows that when evaluating services for children, the opportunity to ask the adults questions about their children. I know within a lot of children's programming, surveys and focus groups are kind of a touchy subject, so this is a way in which to ask questions in relationship to the children, but through the adult or other parents that would be involved or engaged with that child. And as you can see, it's really, again, more broad and getting back into recommending these services to other parents and everything in between. So I'll be posting this PowerPoint online. So if any of these different questioning routes are appropriate for your program, I won't sit here and go over each of the examples, but it just shows the types of questions that you would ask to solicit really meaningful and open-ended responses to those questions. And as you can see, all of these questions are intended to get at open-ended responses. So there's no yes, no. It's all getting at open-ended responses. So I'll go ahead and rush through because it looks like we're getting towards the end. So real quick, a time to check your knowledge. So consider a focus group designed to evaluate an invasive plant pest identification program. We want to determine if participants increase their knowledge. What is the best way to ask this? So thinking about the best practices for focus groups, what would be the best way to move forward with this type of question? I'll give you guys a minute or so. All right, we've got about 10 folks left. If you put in your responses. All right. We'll go ahead and end it now just to respect to time. So we had 3 folks identify A, one person identify B, and 12 folks identify C. And the correct answer is C. So the first question is incorrect, really because you should avoid asking yes or no questions. And this one is, did your knowledge increase as a result of the invasive plant pest identification program? So you're going to probably get a yes or no question. You're not going to get rich information and a discussion as a result of that type of question. The next question is also wrong because it's somewhat of a leading question. And it also could result in somewhat of a short answer. So for example, someone could say, please say how much you learned from this very important program, and they say a lot. And that, I don't know how much information that is really important to making decisions on program or refining your program. So as you can see with the last one, it gives them an opportunity to give an open-ended response and provide data that will be really meaningful to your program. So another important part of focus groups is recruiting. And as we've mentioned, it's really in tune with the target audience of your program. When you have your plan and you know the questions that you're going to ask, the next challenge is finding the right people and to get them to attend the focus groups. The first step is to identify as precisely as possible the characteristics of the target audience. A basic principle of focus group interviewing is that researchers controls attendance. You do not want to invite people simply because they're interested in attending. You invite people because they meet the screens or qualifications for your focus group evaluation. You invite people who have experienced something specific or have common characteristics. So for example, they may have participated in a community program that you are evaluating, or they may be residents in a community and you are doing a needs assessment of that community. They may be farmers who have adopted or improved agricultural practices, and so on and so forth. So one of the many challenges of focus group interviewing is how to get people who may be uninterested in your study to participate. They may be apathetic, indifferent, or even consider the topic to be irrelevant. At times, you want to involve people who are not initially interested in participating. If you limit your study to only those who show interest in the topic, you might get biased results. To be successful, you need to be thinking about recruiting procedures as well as incentives to participate. There are 2 distinct qualities of successful recruiting. First, the process is personalized. This means that each invited person feels that he or she is personally asked to attend and share his or her opinions. Second, the invitation process is repetitive. Invitations are given not just once, but 2 or 3 times. So here's kind of the logical or typical process for recruiting. And first is set focus group dates, times, and locations. Most focus groups with adults are scheduled for 2 hours. Focus groups with children are usually shorter. Don't schedule more than 2 groups in one day unless you have multiple moderators available. The next step is obviously recruit potential participants. Recruit potential participants either via telephone or in person. This allows you to respond immediately to questions or concerns about the study. Before beginning the recruiting, be clear about how you are going to describe the study. People want to know the purpose of the discussion, who wants the information, what the sponsor of the study is going to do with the information, and why they're being asked to participate. So essentially the why me question. Regularly, potential participants want to know how we got their names. Usually you shouldn't invite people to a focus group. That term could be intimidating. Instead, you could say, you are getting a few people together to talk about the topic. So it's really make sure, don't use the jargon of focus groups, make it seem less intimidating and say you're just trying to hold a discussion. You want it to sound as though it will be an easy, comfortable, interesting conversation. Think about who should offer the invitation. Will people be more willing to participate if someone from their community invites them as if they were involved in the group themselves? So rather than you having to invite them and they may not know who you are, have someone within their own group send out the invitation. So for example, the president of the Chamber of Commerce or the community health nurse or someone that they know and respect might be able to help you in your own program. The next is send a personalized letter. Soon after the person has agreed to participate, send him or her a personalized letter. Don't use a general salutation such as "dear friend." This letter should thank the person for agreeing to participate and confirm not only the date and time, but the place in which the focus group will be held. And then finally, phone or contact each person the day before the focus group to remind him or her of the group. And say, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, yada, yada, yada. So again, extend the personalization, but also be a little bit persistent in the recruitment process. Typically, you'll find a pool of people who meet your selection requirements, and then you will randomly select individuals to invite from that pool. So for example, you might invite every 5th name on a list of every 10th person who enters a store. Here are different ways to find a pool. So first, find a list of people who fit your selection criteria. Then think about who might have such a list. And it might be a list of program participants or employees or parents. So rather than you trying to create their list, there might be someone out there that already has it. One best practice is to piggyback on another event that attracts the type of people you want. Do farmers in a certain area get together for a specific event, for example? So if there's a farmers event, you can go and solicit them there in person. Recruit on location. For instance, invite every 5th person who arrives in a clinic. Ask for nominations. Ask key people like elders, educators, or service providers for names of people who fit the selection criteria. And then finally, build snowball samples. Once you find people who fit the selection criteria, then you ask them for names of other people who fit the selection. So it's kind of like a snowball. Once you get one person involved, they identify more and more people till you get the group that you need. So the final part of recruiting is providing an incentive. First, you want to think about what might make it hard for people to attend. Try to eliminate those things. If appropriate, provide transportation and childcare. Then think about what might entice people to participate. You can try to offer some of these things. Ask a few people who are like the people you are trying to attract, what will make them come to your focus group. And then here on this slide, it provides some of the things that can be used to encourage people to participate. So obviously money, if you explain that you'll pay them for their participation, you're more than likely to get more folks excited about the process. But money is not the only incentive that you can provide. There's also food, gifts, a compliment, so explaining to them that their insights are important to the process. Let them know it's an enjoyable time so they feel like there's an incentive to participate. And then finally, the idea of community, that their participation will help the larger community. So these, if you don't have the financial budget to offer money for participation, these are some other innovative solutions to increase that participation. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to Dr. Warner. She'll start to jump into some of the best practices in moderating.
Okay, thank you. Moderating. This is a really great skill to have, and probably the most challenging piece of running focus groups. So in the interest of time, I am going to skip over a couple things. So I'll highlight some of the key points. So your job as a moderator is really to help the group to feel comfortable and need to develop trust both for yourself as well as the process and the organization. This may be you as the extension professional, but in some cases, you're going to find that in an evaluation context, you might want somebody that's not connected to the program. I've used external moderators for both interviews and focus groups when I really want the honest answers about the program. So something to think about. People may be more willing to share when they feel that the moderator belongs to their community or has shared experiences. Definitely something to think about. You don't want to go in and be seen as an outsider necessarily. So having some of those shared experiences is really powerful in a focus group context. And I'm going to skip to the next slide, please, John. Okay, so as the moderator, you want to go into that room mentally prepared, be alert, free from distractions. And it requires quite a bit of discipline to make sure that you're really listening it can be really wonderful to have a whole bunch of discussion going on, but you want to make sure you're focusing on whether people are really answering the questions you're asking. You want to be familiar with the questioning route. John gave some great examples for us. One thing that happens more often than not is that people start answering questions that you're planning to get to later. So you want to know what you can drop, and also you want to know the questions well enough that you can move to another part of your planned discussion and then jump back to what you thought was going to happen next. It does not hurt at all to practice going through your questioning route beforehand. So you might consider working with an assistant moderator. It can improve the quality of the groups and help to take care of details, such as taking notes, summarizing the discussion, and kind of being that extra set of ears and eyes to see if you're getting the same details from the focus group. It's also a great way to learn for someone who hasn't moderated before to serve as an assistant moderator. It's great to use some small talk before the group begins, and all of you as extension professionals are wonderful at this, but your job begins as the folks roll in and you engage them in friendly discussion. It can help your participants to get a sense of you and to start developing that trust and put them at ease as well. It's also a great way to gauge how people are going to interact. You may want to record the discussion. My rule of thumb is to always use 2 voice recorders because one will invariably fail, or you'll have someone that is very soft-spoken that may not get picked up if you have something kind of on one end of the table. So digital recording is great. IRB approval, if you plan on publishing, is going to be required, and I get asked about this a lot, but typically our IRB will require that we get a signature from participants. Especially if we're going to be audio recording, and we do have to save a copy for ourselves as well as bring a copy for them of the IRB documents. Okay, so we are almost out of time here. I'm going to probably go through one more slide and then we can break and hang on if we need to. But as the moderator, you've had your discussion, then you're going to give an introduction of the ground rules. One of the most important things that you'll do is use pauses and probes to really get at the questions that you're trying to have answered, and need to be kind of comfortable with just waiting for people to answer. And it's really a skill to get more information when people aren't talking a lot. So you might ask folks to elaborate on what they said, or you might repeat back what you thought you heard, and make sure that you understand. So that's something to really practice beforehand, is using probes to get more responses. Okay, I'm going to pause here.
I polled the group, and it looks like there's some folks that are willing to stay on after noon. So it's noon. It's about noon now. So if you have to go, we completely understand. This is scheduled till noon, but we still have some more slides to get through that we think are important. We're going to move into analysis, and that'll kind of wrap things up. So if you've got to go, this will be online, but we'd love to have you all stick around and have the opportunity to address any questions.
Okay, thanks, John. So I'll make a point actually from that previous slide, if we have a few minutes. During that introduction is when you have the opportunity to provide any ground rules. It's really, really critical to kind of set the scene for how things are going to go, and to also let people know what your role is going to be. One of the things that I like to do at this point is say to the participants, just so you know, my job is to make sure we get through a lot of information today. And because of that, I may interrupt you at times to redirect the discussion to where we need to go. And, I always say something like, I'm not trying to be rude, but I want you to know I really want to make sure that I hear everyone's opinions. So setting yourself up during that introduction is pretty critical. Let me see. Controlling reactions to participants. I think this is one of the hardest things to learn as a newer moderator, but we want people to be happy and we want them to know we're happy, but really want to make sure we're not providing any cues like, oh, that's a really great point, or you're absolutely right, I totally agree with you. Things like that make them think that they're giving us the answers we're looking for. So probably one of the hardest things to do is to train ourselves not to give that positive or negative feedback. As you're going through the focus group as well, it's you can kind of start your data analysis, and you may be summarizing in your mind the answers to some of your questions. It's really great to repeat it back and to see if you're understanding what your participants are saying. And you can do that as part of the natural flow of the conversation. And you can also kind of sum some things up at the end to make sure you understand. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. We're not going to do the poll that we had planned for you. I have lots of examples of difficult focus group participants, if anyone's interested in discussing those at some point. So, data analysis. Every focus group you run is going to have more information probably than you can ever use. So keep that in mind. Your job is to make sure you find out what is most meaningful for your purpose. And you can analyze the information at a very, very high level, but it kind of depends. Are you looking to publish this, or do you need some simple answers? And then anywhere in between. So as I mentioned, you'll start the process while you're still in the group. And there's a number of different ways you can approach it, but what's most important really is that you have a predetermined structure that you're going to use. So I mentioned you're going to probe for understanding for more details. And then you may offer a summary of the findings and ask if you're understanding correctly. Sometimes that's done after the fact. There's nothing to say you can't reach back out to participants if you want to make sure that you're understanding exactly what they said. So you'll continue that process immediately after the focus group ends. It's really important to kind of do a brain dump to make sure everything that you thought about, if you didn't take it down in your notes, that you write it down afterwards. You might draw a diagram of the seating arrangement. A lot of times I like to do that before the focus group starts. I'm really visual, and it helps me to kind of remember what somebody said, make sure that it's associated with that person. Sometimes I'll write, you'll find you get these gold nuggets when you're running a focus group, and sometimes I'll write those quotes right next to the person so I can kind of track that individual. You might want to spot check the audio and recreate as much of the discussion as possible. And make sure you're organizing everything, label date, file your notes, your tapes, and any other materials. So next is analyzing the responses. Basically, you can either, if you recorded, you can transcribe those recordings. I highly recommend, if there's an opportunity, to request the funding for that. If you're writing a grant, put that money in. It's a couple $100s, and there are people who do this professionally that will save you hours and hours and hours of time. Also some software available to make sure things get into a document. And you can also analyze without a transcript. And in that case, you'll want to summarize the focus group question by question with the specific quotes. But if you can do it with the transcript, a lot of times that's ideal. Okay, so you'll want to analyze the focus groups as soon as possible. Within days of the last group's completion is ideal. No one right way to do it. Everybody has a different preference. Here's one example. You might analyze the groups by categories. If you talk to parents and teachers and students, you might start by analyzing those groups separately. And then you may look at them across categories, compare and contrast, and try and pull out some of the themes by question and then overall, and look for areas where there's agreement and disagreement. A lot of times, disagreement is one of the most important things to come out of your focus group. You might draw diagrams of the analysis, and finally, you describe the findings and back that up with quotes from the participants. And finally, you would prepare a report. Depending on the purpose, you might have a full narrative, you might have a bulleted style list, and you can organize it in different ways. It might be by question, or it might be by theme. Definitely include a few quotes to really show the important points, and honestly, your participants can say these things better than you can usually. So there's always a lot of good use for direct quotes. And then share the draft report with other study team members. This might be a point that you share it with some of your focus group participants to make sure you were accurate. But it's great to share with a lot of different people. You might want to include several folks that weren't there, that are not so closely involved, and that can really support a robust analysis. So a couple more tips for analyzing. Frequency can be used, and it's basically how often a comment was made. This is not particularly a strong measure because you might have a really talkative person that says the same thing over and over, and it doesn't represent group consensus. Extensiveness tells you how many different people made a particular comment, and it kind of gives you a sense of how much agreement there is, which is important. It's hard to figure out sometimes exactly how many different people said something unless you've done a really good job of documenting who said what. I'll put another plug in here for using professional transcription because these folks will come back and have each person labeled with a participant number or pseudonym, and that helps you figure out extensiveness very much. Intensity, something that you should listen for and look for during the focus group. And it's basically how excited or emotional are some of the responses. You can have two different people saying the same exact thing, but get a lot more intensity out of one. And that can show you areas where you really need to pay attention. Specificity is, if somebody answers your question and really tells you why and gives you a lot of details. For example, I feel that this practice is important because I used it, and this is how it worked for me. That has more weight than somebody saying, yeah, I really like that. And finding big ideas. One of the traps of analysis is that you're so involved in this project that you get focused on a lot of detail and you can really miss some big ideas. So It's great if you can step back for a couple days and then come back to your analysis. Look at it kind of with fresh eyes. And, this is another case where it's really great to have an external researcher or someone not so close to the topic review your analysis. And it's pretty amazing how people can pick things out when they're not the one in charge of the analysis. And also another great use for an assistant moderator to play a role here. I'll pass that back over to John. Perhaps. I think we may have lost him.
I am still here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
As you guys can see, focus group interviews can really provide some valuable insights into program evaluation. The focus groups, they can either be used by themselves or in combination with other evaluation methods like surveys or observation. The results that you get from focus groups are particularly valuable because they provide insights into such things as logic and rationale for certain behaviors. They explain why these behaviors take place, how a program issue is perceived, or the barriers or concerns of key stakeholders. And because these answers are presented in words and logic of the target audience. Focus groups look easy, especially when they're conducted by a skilled moderator, but they can be challenging to plan, conduct, and analyze. Successful focus group studies are grounded in 5 key steps: planning, developing questions, recruiting, moderating, and analyzing. And each of these steps is critical to success. Those of you who seek to have successful focus groups should really be attentive to performing each of these steps with care, thought, and skill. Those who seek to develop skills who benefit from reading the literature on focus groups, observing experts conduct focus groups, practicing the skills and seeking feedback. So I would highly recommend that you could either work with myself or Laura in understanding what's needed for a successful focus group, or participate in one of your colleagues' focus groups so you can get a flavor of what that looks like before you're set forth and doing one on your own. So I greatly appreciate everyone's participation in today's webinar. Thank you all for bearing with me as I stumbled through some of the kinks in the Zoom system as we're getting ready to learn what that entails. So we really appreciate that. And now we'd open it up for questions from the group. So if you all have any questions, if you would just type those into the chat. Oops.